Hi, I'm Emily Roberson, author of Lifestyles of Gods and Monsters, among other novels, and I am here to talk today about where you come up with the ideas for a novel. I made a video about how to start your novel, but I kind of realized there's some questions that maybe people might have about the earlier part, which is, where you come up with your ideas. So I was going to talk to you guys about where I come up with my ideas and how other people do, and some ways for you to think about gathering your ideas if you have been thinking about wanting to write a novel or short stories or anything, just if you've been thinking about wanting to write. I think this would probably also work for songs, so here are my thoughts. The first thing to say is just the obvious one, which is that everybody is really different on this. So some of you guys probably have no problem coming up with ideas and it's more a question of narrowing them. And that is a question for a different video. And probably the one I did about how to start the story would be a good place to look for that, about your theme and what's the story you would really like to tell. But for me, So I took this test right after I graduated from college, and it was like an aptitude test. Basically, it was all this whole battery of testing that you get done. And one of the things that came out of that for me is that I'm very low in something that these people called ideaphoria, which is just like the number of ideas you can generate. I was in like the 5th percentile for this. Like at the end of the meeting, the people were like, whatever you do, don't go work in advertising. Like, this would not be a good fit for you. And at that time, I knew I wanted to write fiction, and I was actually kind of terrified about that. Like, how can I do this if I don't have any ideas? And what I realized is that that's not really how my mind works. Like, I don't come up with stories out of nowhere. I build on stories about the things that I'm curious about. So if I see something or if I have a question, that's going to be the source of my stories. They're not generated. I mean, this test was just like looking at some dots and like trying to figure out 100 things that they could be or something. So I think there may be a story you tell yourself about not having a lot of ideas or not having any good ideas, and I would love to have you just put that by the wayside and think about gathering your ideas before you think about judging whether or not they are a good idea at all. So our ideas can come from all over the place. In my novel, Life, Motherhood, and the Pursuit of the Perfect Handbag, it is about a woman who has 2 small children and a full-time job and is trying to figure out how to balance her job and her life and being the person she dreams of being, and being a whole human and all that other stuff. I did not at that point in my life have to look very far to find that idea. I was working full-time with an infant and a 2-year-old, so preschool, toddler, it wasn't a far leap. And when I wrote that book, the whole idea was I just wanted to write something that I would want to read. I just wanted to write something where that character had a happy ending. I just wanted to write something where I could take all the things that were happening to me in my daily life and make them fun and better and hilarious and great. And so for me, that was the first part of the idea. But then the second part of the idea was I was working in marketing for an engineering firm, which I found pretty boring, honestly. And so I have always loved the fashion industry. So my idea was combining those two things, combining the story I really wanted to tell about a woman and her family with an industry I was very interested in, so the fashion industry. So I could show you guys a Pinterest board, and in fact, I probably will. We'll see it in the link here, of just the things I gathered as I was trying to write that story, just like the images of what things should look like and those kinds of things that I gathered around the frame of a story I already really wanted to tell. Now for Lifestyles of Gods and Monsters, it was a totally different genesis of an idea. I was standing in the supermarket checkout line and I was looking at, like a magazine or the Star or the Inquirer or something. And on the front of it was a picture of some of the Kardashians. And I just kept thinking, what are they like? What are they like? They're not like, they don't sing, they don't dance, they don't act. They're just sort of famous for being famous and famous for who they have sex with. And like, what does that resemble? And then my brain, because this is what our brains do, was like, oh, they're like the people in Greek mythology, not like the heroes, not Hercules or somebody. They're like the random girl who, you know, gets chased by Apollo and gets turned into a tree, or, you know, Leda and the swan, or Europa with the bull, or, you know, they're famous for basically for getting the notice of the gods. And then everyone knows about them, even though they didn't really like necessarily sign up for it. But also that myth, the culture of myth, clearly from what I had read, had a culture of fame that I also thought was very interesting. And then I started thinking, what was the worst thing that someone could know about you? And that led to Pasiphae and the Bull and that beginning of that novel. And so that just kind of showed up in my head. And then I spun it out into a story, which clearly was based on a lot of things that I was really interested in. So that's another completely different path into a story. Some people I know will keep a recipe box or a note box full of ideas that they have, and then they'll just throw them in so they can't judge them, and then they'll come and pull them out later. I have always been almost like a magpie collector of scraps of conversation, of, you know, I just have note paper everywhere with like little bits of things from magazines, lines from movies, just bits of stuff. Like I love to collect that stuff. And forever I had it sort of dispersed in random places, but recently I've been doing something really cool, which I'll show you guys here in a second. So I have a notebook now, and I'll show you guys what's in it here in a little bit. But this is the notebook for my newest project, which is a mystery that is set in Hot Springs, Arkansas. But a lot of these pictures, including this one, look, it's Neve Campbell. That picture is like easily 20 years old. I just knew I wanted to put it in a story somewhere, and now it's going in. So I'll flip you through and tell you what's all in here, just as a way for you guys to think about it. Look, this is my desk. Here's where I do all the writing, here on my desk. So this notebook, like I told you, a lot of these pictures I've had for a really long time. And so some of the stuff is really old and some is pretty recent. So I tore these pictures out sometime in the 1990s. I'm just so curious about this girl, like who is this girl? And of course they're not all the same person, but I sort of saw them as aspects of the same character, and named her Shelby. Her name has been Shelby forever. And then here's another example, and this is just a classic thing. These are the things we do. So, all right, so these are two different people. One of them, I think that's the actress Jennifer Ely. I'm not sure, but like to me, they really resemble each other. And yet, you know, this girl, to me, like, didn't seem like she was that confident, and this one seems like a total badass. And I thought, like, what if those are aspects of the same person? And so when I'm trying to write, and that's my Maddie. So when I'm trying to write Maddie, I can go right to this picture and be like, you know, that sense of like her staring the camera down, but also being nervous, like to get that in there. And these are just sort of clues that we have, you know, here's more. These are things I've had for years and just kept and kept and kept because there's something about them that I'm interested in. Like, and I do it also for settings, like, you know, this place, it's not the same place, but it's the same place in my mind. So that's another example. So you can just, you know, draw things in, make a notebook, collect things. Oh, and I went to visit, this book is going to be set in Hot Springs, so I went to visit Hot Springs, and so that's where I put all my research materials here. So here's the bathhouse row where a lot of the story is going to happen. I got, you know, here's the schedule of events that happens in Hot Springs, so I could put that in there. Okay, here was a newspaper story about these two guys who both had graduated from high school during the pandemic, and instead of going to college, they fished around the whole country. They're trying to catch the state fish in every state. I don't know if I'm going to make that into a character, one of those guys. But I know, like, there's something about them that was interesting to me. So I, put it in here. And then when I was writing about knowing I'm going to be writing a murder mystery, I started gathering little bits of information, like what do, are there things murderers do? Do I read an article about someone committing a crime, and am I curious about what they did and how they did it? And then also, I just find this fun. Like when I tell you guys I have a paper doll face, this is the paper doll face. Like I used fancy scissors to cut these things out. Like this is work. This is working. You're working. It counts. Like here's the different bathhouses, and I, cut out the National Park Service stuff and glued it in here. And then, if I read a book, take notes about things and put them in there. And so just sort of, oh, and this, I'll tell you guys in a future video, I went on a trip to Hot Springs and took a bunch of pictures, and soon I'm going to glue them into the notebook. So this is just an example. And then, so I have that, and then I have this other notebook that is just general. Like it's not just about this Hot Springs book. It's about future things, maybe things I would like to do, or maybe future stories I would like to write, or Harry Styles in a kilt, a trench coat. You guys know I love a trench coat. And I just glue them in here with the knowledge that like later, if I want them somewhere else, I can take them out. It doesn't have to all be exactly right. Like I can just, and I don't have to know why I think it's interesting. Like, why did I love this picture? I just love the pink, but maybe she'll be a character in a story sometime, or maybe not. Maybe it's just a picture that I saved because I thought it was cool. So anyway, that's an example of how you can gather your ideas and not be too precious about it. Just have fun. Best part is, to me, it's the fun part. So anyway, that's it. That's the news from my desk. Here's the most important thing I want you to know about collecting your ideas and where your ideas come from, is that the key thing needs to be that they're things that you think are interesting. They're things that draw you. All of us have different things that we like. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? Like nobody has anything that everyone likes. Even something like Harry Potter. There's someone who hates Harry Potter, even if, it's the best-selling thing that's ever happened. There's someone who doesn't like it. And you need to make sure not that you're paying attention to ideas that you think someone else would like, but really that they're ideas that you would like. Because this whole process of writing books is slow and arduous and really fun, but it's only fun if they're things that you are curious about. If you're sitting down to say, oh, I want to look at this because, superheroes are best-selling right now. No. Unless there's a way that you can make superheroes really interesting to you, don't go into a project just thinking like, oh, I think someone else would think this was interesting. It really needs to be an idea that you think is interesting. What calls you? What do you love? What do you keep going back to? What are the stories that you read again and again and again? Those are the ones, those are the ones that are the ones for you. And okay, so some of us are raised with a sense that we're like incredibly badass and we can do anything we want. And some of us are raised with a sense that like we should question ourselves all the time. I definitely fall into the second category, but I really think like this is so important, because if you try to write things that you think someone else will like, it will always be the wrong path. And so even if you're successful, it won't feel right because you aren't successful making something you wanted to make. You're successful making something someone else wanted to make. And I think the lesson of our time, boy wizard at boarding school, space opera, is that like when people make the things that are the closest to the thing they're the most excited about, most of the time, it's better. Like, it's better. It only makes sense to make Star Wars for George Lucas if you love that stuff, right? Like, You have to love that stuff. Like, it's not like Star Wars, at least the first three, it's not cynical. It's based on like a love of those things. And so I think that for me is like the most important thing. Like, most of us aren't gonna like make $1 bazillion doing this. And the key thing is like really just keep coming back to what's the stuff that fires you up? What are the questions you keep asking? Those are your ideas. That's your ground. I keep thinking about this idea that like we each have our own native ground and we can plow that ground and we can grow our stories from it. And it needs to be our native ground. It needs to be the stuff that we really love. So that's my pep talk for this. So if your idiosyncrasies and things you love are where you start from, I have another thing about this, which is that if you start talking to other people about your ideas, which I'm a talker, like I'm a person who talks stuff out, so I'm gonna talk to people about my ideas. Like, I understand some writers like won't tell anybody anything that they're working on. I don't even know what I think if I don't say something out loud. Like, I'm just a talking person, obviously. And if you start telling your ideas to people and they're immediately coming up with all the reasons why they're stupid, you're telling your ideas to the wrong person. Because here's the thing, if you read, watch, consume, buy something that you love, whether that's like video games about zombies or, you know, death metal music with people in clown costumes or whatever, by the time you're buying it, more than one person liked it. So if you present your idea that is in part drawn on your influences and the things you love to someone, and they say, that's stupid, no one will buy it, all that tells you is that they don't know what they're talking about. They don't. It's like when someone, you know, if you write a YA novel and you send it to a friend to read and they say that character reads too juvenile, you can say, oh, so you don't read YA. Okay, I'll find someone else. I have a whole video about finding your critique group. Find someone else to read it. Your grandmother probably doesn't read YA. Maybe she does, but she probably doesn't. And if she doesn't, you don't have to show her your work. And then in the same way, if somebody's like, oh my God, your epic fantasy is way too long, they don't read fantasy. Fantasy readers want it to be long. I know I'm getting fired up now, but I feel really strongly about this because I think there's so many of us where we don't even let our ideas get past like that idea phase. If you use my hoeing your own ground example, they're tiny little seeds and we plant them in the ground, and before we even water them, someone's like, well, that doesn't look like any okra I've ever seen before, and you're like, oh, I'll pull it out. No, it's not okra, it's a pumpkin. So just plant the pumpkin, water the pumpkin, pay attention to the pumpkin, but you don't have to listen to the other people. And here, I'm gonna tell you a story that has stuck with me forever. I may have told it in another video, but I'm gonna tell it again. When I was in graduate school in English, which is a long story why I was in graduate school in English, not writing, mostly that's because it was paid and I thought it'd be fun to go to Austin, but I was in graduate school for English, and I went to reading at the Michener Center, which I did not ever take any classes there, even though that's like one of the most well-known creative writing places in the country. So I know which I speak in the insecurity department. But this woman read a story about a girl being taken on a date to a storefront church, and she worked in the mall. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful story. I still remember that story. I can't remember what happened, but I just remember being so moved by it and loving it. And after it was over, hearing people dismiss that story because they didn't think it was realistic. Now, I grew up somewhere where I knew that girl. Like, not the girl who wrote the story, but the girl that she told that story about. I knew that girl. I knew girls who didn't know what life would possibly be available to them beyond like working at the mall, where like they thought the best they could get was, you know, some guy who didn't beat them up. Like I was, and the fact that anyone would say like, oh, I don't believe that That doesn't feel true to me. When the story was so good, you don't have, like, it wasn't for them. But in that case, it was very much like a culture of being very authoritative. And you could tell that the people were very sure that like this story just was like not a story that was worth doing anything with, because they couldn't recognize the main character in her world. They did not do the imaginative work to put themselves there, because it was a really great story. But in a way, it doesn't matter. Like, if they don't want to do it, fine. It's not for them. It's not for them. And so I am not suggesting that like everybody's work is ready for prime time. It is not. There is a ton of learning that you need to do. There's a ton of writing things to learn. There's a ton of, you know, you can learn to tell stories better. I'm learning to tell stories better all the time. But if you are talking to someone and they are dismissing your ideas out of hand, like, they're the wrong people. They're the wrong people to hear your ideas. And I would say don't trust them with your ideas anymore. As the, you know, I'm the person who wrote a book about reality TV in Greek mythology. So, you know, I just think like your ideas are so special, and they are so important, and they are so core to who you are. And part of this work is like really embracing, like, I love the things I love, I make the things I make, and go forth and make things. Write your stories. Do it to it. Okay, the next one I'm gonna talk about characters, I think. So ideas are everywhere. Pick up the ones you want. Pick up the ones that make you curious. Run with it. This is play. Play. See if you like it. If you don't like it, it's okay. You didn't waste your time. You got to try something out. You know, if you read something in the newspaper and you think, why would someone do that? Write a story about it. You overhear someone talking in the street and you think, why would they do that? Write a story about it. You see a mother squirrel teaching a baby squirrel how to climb a tree, something I saw a long time ago. I need to write a story about it. I love that. Okay, so good luck. Have fun. Write your stories. Do it. You can do it. I trust you.